All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to introduce Jason Springs, and he's going to get started in a few seconds. So Jason is a biopharma diagnostics entrepreneur. He's visiting from the West Coast, which is a amazing ecosystem, obviously, of tech bio and biotech convergence. And he's going to be telling us about his experience across multiple startups and also how he has been able to deliver value directly to patients. So before we get going here, I just want to mention a few things about Jason. I should also just contextualize it by saying that we just met a few months ago, but it's been a wonderful experience getting to learn about Jason's experience in his companies. He is on the advisory board of one of the companies I've founded, and I've truly enjoyed the back and forth on the mundane, but also on the strategic and the big picture. And I'm sure you'll also be super impressed by the experience that he's going to bring to you in a second. So just to give you a bit more specifics here, so he's built companies. He's got a background in business, and he's gone into the diagnostics, the healthcare, the therapeutic space over the past 20 years. And he's been very successful at taking an idea on a piece of paper and then bringing it forward through all the various cycles that he'll be describing. One of his companies, GeneWeave, actually got acquired by Roche for close to $500 million a few years ago, and he's also been working on a couple of other ventures since then and taking them into new directions. And he'll be telling you a little bit more about this in a second. But before I turn over the podium to Jason, I just want to maybe offer a perspective here as you're going to be listening to some of the exchanges in the panels later, but also the talks. I would invite you to think about the impact of AI, perhaps, especially as we're thinking about biopharma, on two axes, namely efficacy, and then the other one is efficiency. We've talked a little bit about efficiency in the past hour plus, which is, what's the likelihood that a drug that enters the clinic will actually make it over into patients. And the sad reality is that, at this point here, we're running a little bit into a cost curve, cycle time wall. And I think this is where computationally intensive approaches of all sorts, including AI, ML, and others, can actually help us have an impact perhaps on efficiency, but also importantly on efficacy. And by efficacy, I really mean how do we move the ball on the standard of care? And that might ultimately be one of the reasons why we're not perhaps seeing the breakthroughs in innovation that we would all like to see in light of the incredible amount of investment, both people, time, technology. But the reality is standard of care is evolving, and we always need to get better every day because yesterday was a little bit worse than today, right? So we need to constantly innovate, and perhaps that's where we're also facing a little bit of our ignorance, right? We don't know as much as we wish we knew on biology, and maybe hoping that AI can help us with that is hype, is hope, or it's a reality, and we'll talk about this a little bit later. So anyways, so as you're listening to Jason's talk, ask yourself, where am I on the efficiency versus efficacy axes, and how will Jason's experience ultimately help us on one or both of these axes? So without further ado, I'm just going to pass it over to Jason, who's going to walk you through his impressive trajectory, and we'll see each other again right after his talk for some Q&A. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, hi folks. Everyone can hear me. Perfect. All right. Ooh. I guess the green button is forward. Anyone know? All right. All right. So as Laurent mentioned, I'm a serial entrepreneur here to talk a little bit about my experience, and I really appreciate the previous speakers. There's a wide range of feelings about AI being delivered to patients. A lot of us are very excited about it, about the possibility of it. There's a lot of skeptics. rightfully so. We've got to deliver data. What I hope that I can talk about here is some of my own personal experiences developing medical products across a wide range of areas. What are the challenges that I specifically faced, and what were the solutions that maybe after a couple of months or maybe even a year of beating my head into the wall actually worked? Because every single one of you that either is trying to develop a drug, a device, you want to acquire one if you work with a pharma company, you're in academia and you want your work to eventually get out to patients, you're going to run into these problems if you haven't already, and this is kind of the day-to-day work if you're thinking about early-stage venture-backed companies beyond what you see in just in the mathematic models. Maybe a little bit about myself, some disclaimers. I've played a doctor, but I am not one. I'm not a scientist at best. I can see my eyelashes if I press really hard on the microscope. And sadly, I'm going to date myself here. The last time that I wrote any form of code was the first time that baggy jeans were popular. It makes me sad. I throw all those old crates away. What I am is a builder. So I've spent the last 20 plus years in incredibly interesting, complex, regulated industries. I started my career out building information networks in aerospace, started my first diagnostic company, medical company called GeneWeave in graduate school. I met some very bright PhDs that created a new diagnostic technology. That was basically a precision medicine company. We figured out how to predict what was the right drug for the right patient in a hospital setting. We were figuring out what's the right antibiotic for a patient, and we developed some of the first algorithms for our technology using AI, back when it wasn't cool. Like Laurent said, sold that company to Roche, had a great return for our investors. I did the obligatory investment round. If you sell a company, you have to help the ecosystem and grow it. Invested in probably a dozen or a few more seed stage startups. I'm happy to say this year we had our first unicorn return out of the portfolio. All of the companies I invested in had a data angle. They primarily used information generation, AI, machine learning, whether to enhance medical services, diagnostics, drug discovery and development. And at Endpoint Health, I've been focused on precision medicine, which I personally think is the most important thing that you can do if you're going to apply AI to any form of healthcare. I think it's the, I'll go out on a limb, maybe part of the panacea of fixing how likely it is for drugs to get through the approval cycle, because it's really about figuring out what kind of patient are you treating. And I'm going to talk about some of the experience I and my colleagues have seen through all of these processes. One of the challenges that I've seen building products for the last decade using AI is belief. We heard this earlier. People don't believe AI-driven drugs are better yet. But if you're someone who is on the inside and you do believe, you're going to run into this problem and you've got to get your product going forward. One of the early examples, about a decade ago, my first company used AI to develop our diagnostic algorithms. We thought they were great. We did all the things you should. We had a holdout set, validation sets, quality controls. We worked really hard, stayed up late. But we had been acquired by Roche, a large, very nice company who bought ours, but they were also bureaucratic, and AI was new. Not everyone understood it. And we spent months trying to teach the development partners, mathematicians, and scientists there why our algorithm was great. Why don't you just think what we think? It ends up that was a terrible idea. We wasted months, which was really important because we had milestone payments associated with getting that product moved forward. And what we ended up finding was that what we really needed to do if we wanted to push a product into the clinic and closer to patients is we needed to solve effectively our customer's problem for us. What we ended up doing within the organization was running a bake-off. All of the people that we worked with were used to sending data off to a Swiss mathematician who would develop an algorithm or hiring an outside consulting firm. So that's exactly what we did. And it ends up that, of course, our AI-generated algorithm was better. We had intense computational power, thousands of samples. We knew what we were doing. But until we were able to actually give our partners a trusted source to compare our products to, we couldn't move forward. This is a really narrow example of something that happens every single day. We talked about how do clinicians know which generative or ChatGPT or other model to use. You've got to find a way to compare it. I hope we do get some standards out, but this is going to be pretty consistent. Data silos. We talked about data, this wonderful future of data being made available and all this kind of stuff. Let me be really specific. Data silos exist, they're going to exist, and if you're a small company, you don't have time to wait for any large consortium of medical universities to find a way around it. We developed an algorithm for acute respiratory distress syndrome in 2019. There are no approved drugs for this disease, and we thought precision medicine was the missing gap. That it's not really a disease, it's a syndrome. This is what killed patients when they had COVID and it went haywire. It's a dysregulation in your lungs related to the immune system. We discovered that there were subgroups of this disease, and we had clinical trial data where we could prove whether or not being in one of those subgroups determined whether or not you responded to a drug or not. What we lacked was data to validate that our algorithms were biologically true. It would have cost us about $1 million to get this type of data. It was mostly sitting inside academic medical universities, and we were competing with pharma companies to actually purchase this data. We didn't have that kind of wallet. One of the things that I've found successful repeatedly at early stage companies and even early stage programs is make sure that you have the right type of transaction. Find the correct way to get to the data that's siloed that you need. We ended up figuring out that we shouldn't be buying data, we should be selling a clinical trial. So we found a bright researcher who was interested in critical care and acute respiratory distress syndrome and ended up forming a partnership. Basically, they were interested in getting the first approvable drug in this indication, and we offered to have them on the paper if they would help us do the analysis and access the data that was behind their paywall. We changed the transaction from buying data to becoming partners in research. And one of the things that we talked about was we would need clinical trial sites. So they got pretty excited about being able to run the world's first precision medicine trial in a really complex illness. And within about a 30, 60-day period, we went from being this poor startup who could never get the information we needed to push our product forward to a paper that went out after a couple of hours of analysis. You can actually download this paper from our website now. COVID-19 actually broke out, so we didn't end up running a precision medicine trial, sadly, in ARDS. But this is a really key example of make sure if you're in these smaller organizations that you're doing the right types of negotiation for the resources that you need. Bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is probably the thing that I've personally fought the most. Every single one of you deals with it. Every large pharma organization, academic organization, every organization is bureaucratic. Small companies move quick, large organizations don't. In the beginning of 2023, we wanted a big pharma partnership. Every venture capital investor says, go get that big pharma partnership. They'll pay you a lot of money. It'll look really great. We ran into a top 10 pharma company that was really interested in precision medicine. All the right people were in the room, we thought, and we all said, hey, let's do this. Let's form a partnership. And their request was, Jason, if you and Endpoint Health can repeat the precision medicine results you've generated with our data, we'll do some work together. We had been able to predict when autoimmune therapies would or would not work in big indications like rheumatoid arthritis and inflammatory bowel disease. We left the room, super excited, probably had too many drinks, and then spent 11 months trying to get the 25 different SVPs, EVPs, directors, whatever, all the different acronyms to say yes. At the end of that 11 months was about a 3-hour analysis on Amazon Web Services. That's where we host all of our applications. And by that year of change, we found out that a couple of people had changed departments, priorities had moved on, and no one cared anymore. Although we were technically successful. What do? Don't do that. Don't go and deal with bureaucracy. The same week that we found out we were not going to do a partnership with this top 10 pharma, we happened to be in Boston. And I ended up meeting a mid-cap, small-cap, a couple of billion-dollar public pharma company that had a really interesting drug. Went to meet them at their office. All 3 people that needed to say yes and sign a contract were in the room. We showed them some of our preliminary data, and within 30 days, not 11 months, we had data in hand, contracts signed, and a positive analysis that was actually a bit better than our initial precision analysis with a large pharma company. 15 days after that, we had a term sheet to negotiate a drug development partnership. So one of the big things here was really just focusing on make sure you know what your goals are. There's incredible pressure in the ecosystem from pharma, from being able to post something on social media that you have a big pharma partnership. But if you're in the business of driving your AI to do something different, find the companies that really can narrowly prove that information and move forward. The big takeaway here, and this is kind of interesting for an AI conference, is none of these problems had to do with AI. I would argue, when we heard some of the discussions earlier, that these longer cycles, this lack of more approvals in clinical trials, probably has nothing to do with AI working or not working. It has to do with what people mentioned previously, that we have to get around the bureaucracy and the skepticism. Appropriately, you got to show the right evidence, but sometimes the right evidence isn't actually the scientific evidence. It's finding the right person to say yes. These are the challenges, and you could come up with 1,000 other examples that we ended up facing, and I try to apply these when I talk to companies or advise them every day, because you can spend years blowing tens of millions of dollars not solving these problems and keeping on doing something that doesn't work. I do want to switch and talk a bit more directly about drug development. I've spent the last 5 years trying to figure out how to develop precision medicines in complex illnesses like autoimmune disease, sepsis, acute respiratory distress syndrome, and I wanted to talk about a few examples of the challenges we face. I don't have to do too much because we already heard them, but what are companies that are succeeding doing that works? So how do you actually get past this? The good news for everyone, I want to present a really positive set of graphs here. We saw the one on the right. Well, the one on the left is we are approaching our 1,000th AI-designed product getting authorization through the FDA this year. I was back in 2017, 2016 for my first product. This is incredible. A 36-fold increase in how many devices and diagnostics are going through the FDA. Devices and diagnostics are easier to develop. They're shorter to approve. I don't want to play down the products that I made, but that's really exciting. It means the agencies get building a lot of experience bringing these products forward. On the drug development side, we've got maybe 60, 70, 80 drugs right now in the pipeline. I'm pulling up the same BCG study that was done last year, but they enlisted that they had one approval. Not sure if that's really there or not, but we're really getting to the cusp where in the next few years, we're going to start to see dozens, hundreds of products designed by AI get through those phase 2 trials. The challenge we're facing right now is we still don't have any better data, but all of you in the room who are working around or with AI-driven drug discovery are facing this really interesting crux that's going to go one way or the other. But today, you're competing with dozens and dozens of other AI platform companies, and it's really hard to differentiate yourself. Importantly, every large and mid-sized pharma company has a couple of hundred employees dedicated to this. So what are companies doing to actually stand out, get the partnerships they want, and make real products to move forward? One, they're differentiating outside of AI. This is a picture of Recursion Pharmaceuticals' laboratory. They have a custom-built facility that feeds their AI platform with data. No one else in the world has this. It would be $1 billion investment for any pharma company to build it. It would probably take 10 years. This differentiates Recursion, and they've had mixed results as they progress some of their drugs through the clinic, but this is a big deal. Differentiate beyond your AI. That makes it easy to pick you out from the others. For precision medicine companies, proprietary data, which is really sad that it's proprietary. I wish we could all share, but every investor, I've done hundreds of pitches in the last few years, looks for proprietary data. Prometheus Bio had a precision inflammatory bowel disease drug. Every investor fell in love with their platform. That was the first slide in their investor deck because they had Cedars-Sinai's proprietary inflammatory bowel disease data set. No matter what math you have, showing that no one else could build it is critical. The last thing is develop your drugs carefully. Adam Wise, they're a friend of mine, friends of the CEO, they use their computational drug discovery system to develop their own drugs. Most companies that are in the AI drug discovery space are going to become drug companies themselves. So you're going to have to start thinking about, how do I pick the right target? How do I make something that's differentiated? Adam Wise is developing a TYK2 asset. This is for autoimmune disease. There's already a blockbuster drug approved for it, but they were able to use their platform to make it unique for central nervous system development. I want to leave with one thing I'm very excited about. I'll talk about ChatGPT and then hand it off. I'm a precision medicine wonk. Everyone is so excited about ChatGPT, so am I. We're going to get close to PhD level intelligence. And that's awesome for day-to-day reduction of work efficiency, something. Actually, I don't really care. I don't care, because we've had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of PhDs working for years to improve drug discovery and development, and it hasn't actually improved that speed and sequence. What I'm personally very excited about is if we can start progressing towards using large language models and building biological foundation models to actually start picking out better patients, defining diseases better, where we can start predicting in silico what targets are actually going to deliver benefit. If you want to see the day that the ability to design new molecules, small or large, delivers higher impact in phase 2 and phase 3 trials, being able to better understand what targets and diseases you're actually treating, I think is the key to making it better, because it will enable you to actually improve those phase 2 results. Phase 2 trials fail when drugs don't work, and if you don't pick the right target, you can have a marvelous drug, and it will still fail. This is probably the most exciting area for me, whether you're thinking generative AI or not. It's really bringing in precision medicine approaches into our complex illnesses, ranging from metabolic disease, autoimmune disease, infectious disease. I hope this is something someone in here is thinking about or working on. I'll leave you guys. I hope a couple of these data points were helpful, and I think I probably took up the question time. So, Laura, if you want to jump up.
Yeah, we'll just take a few questions here, and if you're online, please send us your question, and we'll make sure we address
them. Hey, great presentation. My name is Miloš. I'm generally working in the device development space, and a lot of what we do actually does employ some version of AI, let's put it that way, right? Now, I'm actually going to harp on your last slide, really. With the approach that you are suggesting, you are effectively starting to make almost any disease and any target sort of a rare disease type of approach, right? Where you're significantly limiting the number of patients that ultimately benefit from a particular drug. What is the impact on the cost of drug development of that approach? One, more importantly, how do you justify it at the beginning of from the financial perspective, at the beginning of the process, right? How do you convince someone that I'm actually going to be building a drug that can only treat, I don't know, 1,000 people?
So, awesome question. You must have been in one of my investor presentations. So look, a lot of the diseases I personally care about a lot are pretty big. So let's think of something like autoimmune diseases. So rheumatoid arthritis, inflammatory bowel disease, lupus, you name it. These are already areas where we have massive blockbuster drugs that are kind of okay. So like Humira works substantially in maybe 1 out of 3 patients. It's the largest, most valuable drug ever created. So if you're able to take that kind of blockbuster market and find out, well, which third of patients actually respond to Humira, that third of patients probably has a much more substantial benefit than the other 2/3 where the drug doesn't work. And what you're really opening up is the ability to develop a drug with a lot more precision in that other 2/3 of a very large indication. And if we want to think about the cost, the beauty of clinical trial statistics is that every % addition of efficacy you have over placebo delivers a more than proportional decrease in how much you need to power the trial to see your efficacy. Now, I'll admit it doesn't change the safety argument. You do end up having to run a longer safety trial, but I would argue that thinking about shrinking a market is the wrong way to think of precision medicine. If you can increase the total amount of efficacy you can deliver to a patient population, and if it's true that people pay for more efficacy, then you are increasing the market for pharma and any company that wants to develop precision medicines. I think if you look at a small disease that has 10,000 patients and split it into 50 subgroups, not a great idea. But I think there's enough low-hanging, big indications with thousands or millions of patients that we still don't have good results for, where there's so much better we can do, but just by understanding the disease is better, and we can see it in the market. You saw that Prometheus Bio acquisition. They were successful. They got a precision medicine drug into phase 3 for one of the first times in the history of autoimmune disease. I hope it pans out. I hope the results actually work. Great question. Any others? Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
I don't know. Okay, here. Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. I'm Arturo Loizaboni. I'm a medical oncologist, and I use AI for clinical trial matching mostly. But of course, as an investigator myself, I always been, looking at folks like you who actually have the big picture beyond just the clinic, right? So looking around. 2 questions for you. The first one is, have you seen a trend now to look at multimodal approaches, not just because recursion, for example, I love what they do. I know Najat going there, amazing. But the question is, for example, in cancer, it's not just about the biomarker, but it's also about the microenvironment and the other components, including the radiomics, the patient cancer journey at the time, what prior treatment was given, what are the dynamic changes across the time that the patient is going to be treated with that molecule.
Yep.
So have you seen any of those multimodal approaches being taken into consideration for drug development? That's the first question. That was a heavy one. And the second one is, what are your thoughts about synthetic control arms as well? When you use, for example, Medidata, they do this whole platform of synthetic control arms based on normalized information from clinical trials to emulate or simulate studies and take to drug development.
Yeah.
I have some thoughts about it, but I would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. I'll give the good news is my answers are going to be, I'm going to give you half an answer. I'm not a synthetic control arm expert, so I won't be able to comment on that. On multimodal data, so genomics, transcriptomics, all the omics. I have not seen a company bring a drug into the clinic utilizing multimodal data yet. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I just haven't looked. I can tell you that is the #1 thing that excites me. It interests me. My own company, we focused on getting a much broader picture. We didn't look at just single cells. We looked at gene expression data both from tissue and from peripheral blood, because when you're treating complex illnesses, the patient is responding, not just the cell. And I think you lose a lot of information in that. I think we're getting kind of close on time, but I think you will see it. Multimodal is going to be the way to go. It's just expensive.
Yeah, thanks.